Any questions for the good of the cause? We're going to get more deeper into the micro and macro analysis of the social structure and social interaction today and some of the theories with this. Any general questions?
Yeah, I got a question, if you can hear me.
I can hear you.
So I'm not being trying to be a pain in the butt or a thorn in your side about grading, but how and I know you have probably way more classes than this one, but how soon typically do you do a turnaround on grading assignments after their due date?
Pretty quickly,
Okay.
within a day or two, 1 or 2 days.
Okay. That's
I just
cool.
went through some right at the beginning of the semester. There's a lot of stuff going on, so but yeah, I get pretty back to you guys within a couple days when things are submitted. So
Right on. I appreciate
I just
that.
went ahead and most of you guys got a good understanding of sociological inquiry now. I was reading, went through and graded some of those discussion boards, all those discussion boards. When we talk about structurally, in the embedment of or sometimes we call them machinery of society. You hear some things, of recent that sociologists have noted, things like systemic racism, systemic discrimination. One of the things I want you guys to write on is the conflict perspective on social structure that looks at how the social structure socially marginalizes certain groups. And I wrote somebody in an email recently over the weekend, we looking at the social, economic, political, and historical circumstances that marginalize certain social groups, right? Um, you can find race in a lot of the data. Inequalities are very complicated. Okay, it's a tangled web, and we'll get into this slowly throughout the semester when we get more into social um, stratification. There's a correlation. There's all these different correlations that create inequality. You got intersecting of all these different social institutions, which we'll kind of unpack this morning. So we'll get into some of this stuff. That discussion board is on that, and it's these some of these discussion boards prime you guys for the midterm essay questions, which is you guys can practice a little bit on this. Let me just share my screen here.
So I have something real
So
quick. I don't know if anybody else is experiencing this, but I have not received an email on my Ivy Tech email account in like 4 days, and I'm not getting any kind of update statuses on discussion board posts. It doesn't show if somebody new has commented. I have to physically go in there and look. I don't know if that's a system-wide thing or maybe it's just something on my end.
it might be call the technical support. They're really good about getting back to you.
Okay,
Send a help desk ticket email and they'll help you out on that really quick.
thank you.
It could be something in the system. Ivy Tech is a massive organization. It's a big, massive bureaucracy. So, delving into the topic for this morning, social structure and social interaction. We look at these large scale macro sociological features of the social structure, its effects on social groups in entire societies and globally. We're gonna compare and contrast the functionalist perspective on this as well as the conflict perspective in a second. Um, they're looking at these large, machineries of society and its influence on individuals and social groups, socially, economically, politically, historically, and culturally, and how it works. And then also, how identity statuses work. Microsociology is utilized by symbolic interactionists. Now, that's not so they're not looking more at that large scale feature of society and the social structures and the institutions and how they work and all that stuff. They're more interested in what happens when we come together at the most micro level of social interaction. Okay. that society is really just a sum of interactions between individuals and groups, a web of interactions, right, that kind of mesh together and form society. Um, so symbolic interactions I will look at the self and self concept, which you talked about, looking at, things like the presentation of self. We'll talk about Irving Goffman's theory later this morning, the social construction of reality, how we construct our reality and live within our narrow definitions. That'll be a question on your midterm essays. So now when you look at the macro, we're going to look at the macro for a while. We'll also look at social change throughout time. So when you hear sometimes sociology talk about the social structure, we're talking about the machinery of society, right? These pattern relationships that we have that persist through time, right? Uh, our behaviors, our attitudes, how our identities are formed, right? How we define ourselves, and our behaviors and attitudes are determined, and our life chances are determined to our location within that social structure, right? If you take, for example, social class, that's a status, okay, within a society. It differs whether you're born rich, whether you're born poor, whether you're born in the middle, okay, depending on the society you live in, right? Racial ethno-racial identities and group identities could play a part in that and marginalize those type of things, and influence your lived experience. Okay, your gender status could influence your lived experience based on that location, right? And it's going to form all these type of things that form the individual, right, and group identities as well. So when you look at the different components, you have things like culture and how culture works, right? We talked about that last week. Social class is a big determinant. So sociologists will look at this a lot, with one's life chances, whether you'll be able to move, what type of educational institution you'll have, which is a big one. What type of governmental services you'll have, what type of health, and how the influence of health insurance institutions and healthcare, which is a big institution. Your representation within the political structure, right? And types of things within your community. Um, Different statuses, right? You have different statuses, which we'll unpack in a second. Different groups, and then the big one is the institutionals, arrangements of a society. You have traditional ones, being uh, politics, political institution, governmental institution, um, things like religion, education, healthcare would be one. You have religion is one. You have emerging ones. For example, some sociologists would put an emphasis in how sports as an institution has emerged. The military being a dominant institution. A lot of federal spending, discretionary spending, goes to the Pentagon and military spending in America. Um, a good portion of your income each week goes to this massive military, as C. Wright Mills called industrial complex, right? Things like that. When you look at the political institutions, and how those work, what we know a lot about traditional institutions in the 21st century, they have really stopped working for mass society, especially for middle and working class people. There's been tons of research on this. We'll get into this when we get into politics and the economy. And the wealthy and the powerful have used their way within societies to benefit their group. And so we'll look at power and wealth in politics and that stuff. So a lot of these traditional institutions aren't working anymore, right? Because what they're supposed to do, right, is to meet the common needs of civil societies. That's what they're designed for. They have tended to decay of late, right? So that's a real concern amongst sociologists and political scientists, and things like that. Um, Education is a big one, okay, in most societies. That's, you know, your location within the educational institution is going to be directly intersected into your social class, right? And some of you may know how schools are funded, okay? They um, are large part from local and state and property taxes. So you have rich and poor schools, and it drastically affects, you know, especially people from the underclass, poor people, and their life chances. So now, when you look at the different the comparing the functionalist perspective versus the conflict perspective on this, functionalists, you know, are going to say they're going to look at the order perspective, right, and um, that the social institutions, right, web together and create this order predictability type of thing, right? That they meet the needs of everybody. You know, all the institutions work and form kind of like a organic type of thing, you know, just like your body, the blood flowing through it and stuff like that. You know, it just assumes that, you know, all this stuff works, you know, all together. You know, it serves a function, right? It just all comes together. You know, we just, you know, get up in the morning and we don't even think about it. We go to work or whatever, we go to school, we get our kids, we pour the orange juice. You know, no one really thinks too hard about how this stuff works when they go out in the road and they drive their car. Okay. Now, conflict theorists say, okay, that's kind of an uncritical, right? Look at the social structure, that it doesn't meet the needs of everybody, right? The social structure creates in-group, out-group dynamic, you know, kind of a insider-outsider dynamic, right? Um, Social class is a big determinant of one's location, like I was talking about. That the social structure, historically, politically, you know, culturally and otherwise, have socially marginalized a good portion of societies, right? It works to the benefit of the upper classes, and everybody else kind of has to really work a lot harder. And these fluctuate and change, these pattern relationships we have. So conflict theorists are going to say, well, the institutional practices and the societal outcomes, right, don't add up, right? The institutional practices benefit the wealthy and the powerful and the upper classes, and everybody else is kind of left to scramble and try and just to get into that middle if they have a chance even now. And so mobility patterns of late in the last 40 years have kind of flatlined, wages have flattened, and inequalities have taken up. So that's a real concern along the lines of conflict theory. So what happens, and you see this with how people react to when the social structure marginalizes and doesn't meet the needs of mass societies. You know, I raised this with Emil Durkheim's Anami and Strain. People go through strains, right? Especially with middle and working class people and the members of the underclass, right? They react in not so good ways, right? They have to resort to informal economies. The opportunity structures stop working for these groups, right? And it further creates advanced social marginalization and creates like a stigmatized status, okay? Um, and you know, you see a direct correlation to this with, for example, the spike in suicide rates, the spike in drug addiction, the opioids and things like that. You know, we know this with addiction and things like this. You know, when people aren't, you know, have uh, a job and, you know, a sense of purpose within a society, you know, where they can, you know, work and be involved, interacting and building and working within their kid, whatever, right? They start doing different things. You know, it creates joblessness, you know, coupled with other things, creates all types of things. So it's very important that the opportunity structures in institutional practices, right, are able to be reorganized to work with this. So this is a big, we could go down the rabbit hole all morning with this big debate on this of how to fix this stuff. But, you know, this is on both sides of the political divide, really a problem, right, with social marginalization and in advanced, Louis Walcott calls it advanced social marginalization, okay? And we'll come back to this when we get into to the stuff on social stratification and things like that in the second part of the class. Questions on that? It makes sense? Say yes. Everyone good on that? That's a question on your midterm essay. That's a question on your discussion board for this week. So feel free to explore that. You can really apply that to that what's going on today. You guys. So this is the big debate. Again. So when we look at statuses, ascribed statuses, those are things that we receive at birth. We inherit these. One's race or ethnicity would be one's social class, one's gender would be a type of an ascribed status. Um, achieved status is something that develops out of some type of accomplishment or some type of work or some type of involvement effort on our activity on an individual's part. Social class, we live in an open social class system, right? And that allows for upward mobility as much as you want. And it also allows, for people to drop as freely as they have, so you can climb up and you can climb down. Okay. So, when we think of statuses in the non-sociological stats, we think about status seeking, material possession. We'll talk about things like that, but then the sociological stat, we're talking about all those different things that an individual will occupy, ascribe and achieve. Social class is a big one again, with ascribed status. You can climb, right? And it's kind of like those in America, society, remember if you ever went to the county fairs or something and they had those little things and it was like harder than hell to get the coin and to pick up that stuffed animal, and you're just like trying and trying and trying. So life chances are very dependent on one's ascribed status and social class, and how that works. Now, if you look at master statuses, now these cut through all the other statuses, especially with traditionally marginalized groups. It could be a master status of race or ethnicity, right, or ethnocultural identity. Many people identify their identities formed through their ethnicity or their religion. Okay. And that can create a master status depending as far as in relation to numbers and data and what society you're looking at this. This also happens with age, as well as being female or male or things like that can change and fluctuate throughout one's lived experience. Now, groups, next week we'll talk a lot about groups, especially formal organizations and some of the theories on this. One thing that goes back for ages, when we evolved from primitive Neanderthal type of brains, that people within any society like to belong to a group, right? It forms a big part of lens of how we see things. Okay. So we'll unpack a lot of the stuff with group and especially with formal organizations. We talked about social institutions. Of note, I would talk about, and this would be conflict theory. The economy is a big, into some, right, conflict theorists, is a big driving force in the how all the other institutions work. Okay, if you guys are business students or things like that, you see the stock market is going berserk right now. Okay, and think of it like this: you have On the other side of it is the economy, right? So the stock market is kind of like this casino, if you will. The stock market isn't the economy. The joke about the stock market is it kind of, that's a gauge of rich people's, how they feel about, how their perception of how things are, right? The economy is something completely different, right? And there's all these variables that go into that and determine the education, determine the familiar structure, determine what the institutions of government and politics and how they work and who they work for. Okay. It'll determine what type of science, especially it'll determine the how medicine, right, is practiced and things like that. We're the only modern American society that doesn't have single payer health insurance, right? Um,
Could I get you to repeat what you said there? I got the economy is a big driving force, and then I couldn't keep up with you.
this is conflict theory, and it determines the um, I guess the institutional practices of how education works, how family works, how government and politics work, right? Um, but we know about how government and politics works. It's a million and billionaire type of game, isn't it? Right. There's been tons of study by the Rand Corporation. You'll see there'll be a scholar, Lawrence Lessing, that will look at his research. Um, that those institutions now work for about 0.5% of society, right? The big donor class, right? And this has created this advanced type of inequality in society where you have this mass haves and have not type of societies. The pandemic has exposed a lot of that stuff, right? So in the economy, is the driver of jobs. What type of, when you guys get out of college, you're hoping to transfer that credential, and what college does, the higher ed credential, it signifies something to the labor force, right? That wider, economy, right? That you're on the treadmill, right? It sorts, the higher ed kind of sorts people into the economy, doesn't it? Right? You see, you can get around not going to college. It's a little harder, but that's a status, or that's a credential that gets you on the treadmill of the economy, right? And it gets you back. It's, if you ever walk on the treadmill and you get up to like 6 miles an hour, right, or you run on it, get you to about 8 or 9 miles an hour, right, on that treadmill. And that's the whole goal here, right, is to get as many people on that treadmill, right, um, of the political economy, voting, volunteering, working, having families, paying taxes, and it works. So right now, we're kind of ebbing and flowing in between. Everyone's really in survival mode. Many people are just kind of sheltering right now, largely because of the pandemic. I mean, so if you look at medicine, right, who's buying up all the vaccines right now? The wealthiest countries in the world, right? If you look at the map of who's getting access to the vaccines, right? It's a very small percentage of the world, and that small percentage is the wealthy and powerful nations and societies in the world. So this is important, right? So sometime, you'll hear me talk about institutional practices and societal outcomes, right? These, are interrelated, and they create advanced discrimination. You get racial discrimination within these things. You get class discrimination and things like this, and so on and so forth. um, makes makes sense? You guys following me? I didn't lose anybody. Questions on any of that?
Yeah. So this is just something that I noticed, and maybe it kind of is in the macro, under the macro umbrella, but I'm noticing a lot of my friends and classmates and colleagues, whatever, that are actually out of work in the field that they went to college to get that degree for. Like I know a lot of people that are still swinging a hammer doing construction because they can't find a job doing the job that they went to college for and earn that bachelor's or associate's degree or technical certificate for that matter. It's not even being overqualified. It's just that there is nothing there right now.
Right. Yeah, I mean the permanent job loss right now, and it keeps going. I mean, this each week it's about 900,000 people that file for unemployment.
But you're
Joblessness is
tripping over
joblessness is a
$8 an
big
hour
problem,
job.
and it's not just you know the people that went to college, you know, are doing better right now, but that's not a get. That it's still a lot of people, you know, have the master's degrees, right?
Mhm.
For a long time, the MBA was the degree to get when I was
Right.
growing up in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
And you had just so many people with MBAs, and it became flooded, right? And so that credential kind of
Lost some
I
value.
really encourage you guys after this class to take Professor Matt Fisher for macroeconomics. You'll get more into, you know, the economic basis in studying this stuff and how it works. But yeah, Jason, I mean, it's a big problem, not just with people that just have the high school education
Yeah.
or GED.
And
The
so like,
people that have a master's degree have fallen down in
yeah.
of levels of social mobility. And right now, they're really just trying to, I mean, think of society as these potholes all over the place, right?
Uh,
You know, when spring comes, you know, and it warms and the
yeah.
roads are just like it's like you're, you know, in a war zone.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it is right now. And they're just the Federal Reserve, and you know, they're throwing money like
Yeah. Just firing up the
it's
prison.
like it's a party, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's like it's I mean it's and so what they're doing is they're just filling the potholes right now, right? Why mass society is kind of just sheltered in place right now, and they're just a lot of people are just trying to put food on the table and making sure their kid, you know, is doing his work on his Google Meets with the school if the school's closed.
Yeah.
um, so it's a good time to be taking sociology, but you
Ah,
know, that's really, you know, you have to react and you have to deal with these flows in how social change happens, right?
see, and
Other
it's like,
people have to other societies have to deal with this all the time, right? So you see this mass huge shift in transformation of societies, you know, really going back to the Industrial Revolution, 18th and 19th century, which gets into the other stuff. But yeah, Jason, it's a heavy time right now for a lot of people, even people that have gotten that credential and we're on the treadmill. A lot of those white collar jobs, you know, are going away.
so like a lot, some other things I'm
So
noticing too is like you're those college degree jobs are getting harder and harder to find, but you're tripping over $8 an hour jobs. The stock market is exploding, like you said, and everywhere you go, at least in Michigan City here, all the stores are packed. The people are spending money, and it's kind of scary. Like, what's going to happen in a year or two because the government fired up this printing press and are just making it rain money, and the good paying jobs are falling off, but the $8 an hour jobs are everywhere. People, is it like people are just getting buried in credit? Like it's kind of
it's
scary for
yeah, I
me.
mean it's yeah, I mean there's you know the fundamental rule of social science research, right, is correlation doesn't mean causation. There's all these correlations that go into one's, you know, life experience, lived experience. Sometimes C. Wright Mills called it, right,
Mhm.
and create, you know, these strains in Anami that Durkheim talked about. You know, and you got the pandemic, you got, you know, the economy was kind of going in a kind of not so good place before the pandemic, and the pandemic just popped everything. A lot of economists were concerned with, you know, corporate debt and things like that, and an overvalued stock market. So
Uh,
you know, for example, I was having a conversation with Professor Fisher last week about this. You know, it has all the makings, all the the flashing red lights, um, of a big, collapse, especially in the stock market, right? It
Yeah,
looks just like 2008. It looks just
yeah.
like 99. It
It
looks like
fe
1929,
it
and
feels like
so economists are going, "Oh my God," and they're just throwing money. So I
it
mean,
feels like we're in the perfect
we're
storm.
living through a major shift, I guess, to
Yeah,
my point, Jason, and everybody else on this slide here. That sit back and enjoy the ride.
it feels like we're in the
I mean,
perfect storm.
you gotta, you can either, I like to say, the society is like this big, massive treadmill. You can either get on the treadmill of the political economy, or you can sit on the side and cry and dib and dab without doing that. I don't recommend it. No, nor do a lot of people. You got to play the game. It's a master chess match, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
You guys are at the table right now. You're playing the game. You're doing what you're supposed to do, right? You're staying out of trouble. I'm sure for the most part. You're going to college. Many of you supporting a family. You probably have 2 or 3 jobs, maybe even working full time. So we're living through this humongous, shift. Inequalities are increasing greatly, just how they did during the Gilded Age. So within the top part of that social structure, sociologists now are calling that top 5% of society in America is like a gilded ghetto, right? It's just blocked off. Everybody
Huh.
in that top 5 and 10%, they all have private schools that it's a one-way ticket into Harvard and Yale and things like that. And so scholar Daniel Markofis at Yale wrote a book on the meritocracy trap and some of these things. It's a concern because when it's not meeting the needs of mass society, you have problems. Okay. And so we're seeing these historical shifts that are, red flags, the same it was during the Gilded Age, in the turn of the century, in the 1930s, in the 70s, and then big seismic changes, especially what happened in 2008, where everything just dropped off, and really the global economy just froze up for a little bit, and it was pretty scary. And what had happened, during the age of industrial capitalism, we talked about this with some of the early social theory. Wealthy individuals, right, took control of the means of production and corporations, but also transferred that, into playing a more dominant role in political institutions and government policy, right? So really, they're rewriting the rules, right? They were doing it back then, and they do it now. Okay. Major shifts of power, and prestige and wealth are happening, more, and this goes back to around 1980. Um, so big, and in post-industrial societies, the information society, this was a big boom, right? And well, what happened with that boom, right? As all these, big Silicon Valley stuff and that emerged, right? What had happened is that became very, very, very concentrated. Um, there's a video on the modules. I believe it's on the one with social stratification and social class. It's called The Curse of Bigness. So when we talked about this last week with mass media and culture, this information society, what we see, the known, and there's another article called The Known and Unknown, which is in this module. What we're seeing and what access to information, it's very few companies that are controlling this flow of information, right? And so you have to really work harder. And I want you guys to pay specific note when we're doing this. Is social theory, right? I mean, this stuff I've been teaching this for a long time. I try and summarize, a lot of the readings and a lot of the changes and the stuff like this. Social theory is a lot different than conspiracy theory. Sometimes you might hear these things where I'm analyzing things and applying social theory. So don't confuse the two, because you see during economic anxiety and economic downturns in society, conspiracy theories tend to flow and get popular, and they are now. So, you know, differentiate between the two. Okay, this is social theory. This has just been a trend in the social structure. Okay, it's not this, you know, evil group of white men, sitting there and saying, yes, let's control this globally. No, it doesn't work that way. Um, so with this, with social cohesion, Durkheim talked about his concepts of mechanical and organic solidarity. Right, this social glue. You heard me say this in the beginning of class. you know how does all this stuff work? Right, if you sit back, I mean, you just turn on the PBS news hour for hour and you just kind of see it: military coups, a pandemic, economy just tilting. um, you have what have you, right? And this solidarity, kind of this social glue, and it's this collective consciousness that people, out of performing the same tasks, right, or similar tasks. It could be within the interdependence on the division of labor, when he wrote the, how we divide up tasks, right? Things are laid out and are expected to us. As it becomes more complex, right? You get kind of advanced, stuff like that. And so, we don't think too hard, most people, about how this goes, right? We think very hard when it comes tumbling down, right? Um, and this pandemic kind of did this. We think of the society as this balloon, and there were all these problems, and it was being held together, right? And along comes, which everybody in the scientific community knew, there was going to be, a big pandemic that was going to hit at some point, right? And there'll probably be another one. And that just popped everything, and everything kind of spilled over. And you guys remember, it was pretty freakish back in March and April, where we were all locked down, and you're wearing masks. Um, so an important note about social solidarity and societies and change. Robert Putnam wrote a book called Bowling Alone. And he looked at this since, really looked at these trends since the 1960s, how, what Frederick Tonies called Gemeinschaft, or intimate community, was being replaced by impersonal associations, right? Where it shifted from, community life, everyone knows everybody, there was trust, amongst neighbors, um, and as global capitalism evolved, right? And Putnam talked about this in his book. You saw really a breakdown of that. You saw kind of a culture of fear. I talked about Barry Glassner's book in the last lecture, and you see, as especially throughout the '80s, Putnam gets into this a lot. That '80s culture, and the very narcissistic. You're defined. Watch David Brooks's lecture called "The Lies Our Culture Teaches Us." I don't know if any of you have. I probably referenced that last week as well. That you are, people began defining themselves not by who they were as a person, but by their accomplishments, right? And the status is that they achieved,
Yeah,
right? The meritocracy type of thing.
yeah.
And so this societies became dominating by impersonal relationships, just individual accomplishments, defining yourself, by things and material possessions, self-interest, a distrust. If you look at the Pew Research on distrust, as far as distrust in government, distrust in negative political polarization, right? Where you have negative partisanship. Jonathan Haidt looks at this in his book, The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Religion and Politics. A really good read if you're interested in this. And it's not that, at one point, and Putnam talks about this in his book, where, the Democrats, Republicans, they disagreed on something, but they sat down and they had drinks at the end of the day, and had a cigar and said, all right, what do you want? Because democracy is about compromise, working with people. We don't all think alike, right? But generally we want the same thing. In the 90s and 2000s, that just got ripped apart. So you see trends in negative partisanship. And what happened with society is you see this growth in individual accomplishments, self-interest, greed, the Gordon Gekko greed is good type of 80s stuff. Have you ever seen that movie? And this was manifest in the political institutions as well. And now it's just very intensified. So you don't see a lot of, hopefully, some sociologists talk about a great reset, that everyone's just going to go, hey, what's, time out here, right? We're all going to work together and live together, or we're all going to perish together. So I think this is interesting to note, and it's really it's weird because what happens with instant communication and thing, people just they spend more time, they spend more time with these, interpersonal, dominated by impersonal relationships, and you know distrust the neighbors, distrust the other people other than them, and it's not just they don't agree with liberals or conservatives, but you look at the Pew Research on that, 2/3 of the people polled in that one research said that, it's not just that, it's partisanship, but it's negative partisanship where they see the other side as a threat to, society and the nation, which is a problem. So this is a big, big debate within modern societies like ourselves. Questions on any of this stuff so far? I know I'm laying it on heavy. This is important stuff.
I like when you were talking about
Makes sense.
Yes, I like how when you were talking about Democrats and Republicans getting together and having a drink and smoking a cigar and saying like, okay, what do we need? Like the first thing that came to mind was something I learned in this ethics class was John Rawls's veil of ignorance. I wish that was implicated or used more often. I think it would better us.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't want to give away too much of my good stuff, which is coming up in the coming weeks. I'm starting to, but we'll get more into that stuff now. Micro sociology now, right? What we do, right? And this is now we're not looking at this larger social structure and social environment and its influence. Now we're just looking at what here, right? Symbolic Interactionist. There's a book called The Social Construction of Reality back in the 60s. Really great book. Looked at, how our perceptions of reality are largely, shaped by the subjective meanings that we give things, right? We give meaning to things, okay? And we construct our own realities and we live within these narrow definitions, right? So you have objective reality. I mean, you see this, with alternative facts and a lot of conspiracy theories. You have truth and you have objective facts. Then you have subjective reality. If it doesn't fit into one subjective reality, then people perceive it as really not real. So what happens now, if you don't have, Cornell West, the great scholar at Harvard, said, once you do not have an agreement of facts and social facts, and when you can't agree on that, then you're toast, right? And so you have this subjective meaning that people interpret this stuff, and you have deliberate ignorance, right? And so when people construct their own realities and they live within these things, it makes it very hard, And so the Thomas theorem was something, and I want you guys to write on this for your midterm essays. You can have a lot of fun with this question. If people define their situations as real, they're real and their consequences, right? So if you look at a good example is with race, right? Race is a social construct. It was constructed through social, political, right, and historical circumstances, going back to around the 15th century, is pseudoscientific theories, right? And people began giving meaning to it, as there were certain groups that were superior and certain groups are inferior, so on and so forth. Okay. Um, when we give meaning to something that is not fact, right? And then you have this problem, right? So the social construction of reality could also have to do with judgments of taste, right? Or things of value, in a capitalist society, comparing and contrasting a fake Jackson Pollock or Picasso that, only like two people in the world, three people could tell the difference, right? One sells for, $200 and the other one sells for $10 million, right? The one for $10 million, we give meaning to it, right? Because it's shared meanings that it's worth $10 million, right? So you look at things with value. Right now, we place value on things, judgments of taste. So I mean, if you look at conspiracy theories, for example, flat earthers, people believe the Earth is flat. And this also has to do with ideology, right? Ideologies create these things and are very coercive to individuals. And it relates to the social construction of reality and perceptions of this. Um, so it's almost like a collision between objective social fact and a social construction, a subjective interpretation, right? Generally, what this theory says is, though, we construct it in that's the most favorable way. We Thurston Veblen was an economist and political scientist. He talked about conspicuous consumption, right? And the quest for material possessions as a signifier, a status anxiety almost, to 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 give subjective meaning that you're a superior person other than everybody else in the lower classes. So you get like classism and things like that. So Veblen talked about this. Really good piece. Social Construction of Reality is the name of the book. Questions on that? You guys can write on that for your midterm essays. The discussion board for this week is on the conflict perspective on social marginalization. Now, you probably won't find that in the OER book. Some of this stuff, the way I have the course designed, I mean, you need to go out there and disseminate knowledge and information. I'll give you a lot of leads with information on the modules, and to use your own intellectual capacity to apply this stuff and really make it your own, based on your own lived experience and your own analysis of yourself and the society you're living in.
I have tons of resources. If any of my classmates need anything, they can hit me up after class.
Thanks, Jason. So ethnomethodology looks at how the background assumptions that we all have that form the core of one's reality, right? And provide kind of like rules and how we act and things like that. When we go into certain social and situations, we have basic background assumptions. If we go in the store, we're assuming everything's going to work. You go out driving a car, right? We have certain background assumptions that everyone's going to be, following the rules and following, not running stoplights and stop signs and driving on the wrong side of the road. You go into the doctor's office and you know he's going to do certain things. Now there is sociologist by the name of Irving Goffman, and his theory of dramaturgy. And Goffman wrote a book called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. And he analyzed social life in terms of, like acting or drama on stage, right? And your identity and yourself, think of it as a coat rack, when you leave the house, right? And according to Goffman in his theory is we put on different selves, Okay. And when we do that, we engage in what he called impression management, of how we want to, the impression we want to give others, and how we want them to receive, ourselves. So, we're out there on the world stage, if you will, presenting ourselves in the most favorable image, right? As you see this, as consumer culture and consumer societies and then social media evolved, this kind of threw, right, another level analysis into what Goffman was saying, right? So if you look at social media and Instagram and these type of things, it's, if you apply this theory to that, you guys can write on this for your midterm essays. People are presenting themselves, and a lot of times now it's just, it's photoshopped or whatever. They're constantly managing, the impression that they want to give others. Or if you've ever been in the service industry or worked retail, right? Or or are a waiter or waitress or worked at a Starbucks, right? You have to sit there and smile and, show the most, and even if people are real, you're doing it because you're wanting to get a tip, and of course you want to be nice to the customers because your boss is gonna, scold you if you're not. It also has to do with, getting work and a job and things like this. A lot of people, when they go to work, they have to manage engage in what they call, what Goffman called impression management. Um, so this is important today. You look at, political actors, within, our society and other societies are engaged in this constantly, right? That's, that's what the public relations industry kind of was forming. It was created by the, corporate community and political, institutions with this to engineer consent. So you're presenting yourself in the most favorable, image, that you want. Because what these people are doing, is they're constantly thinking about getting reelected for the next term and keeping that, congressional or Senate seat, for their state. So Goffman, very important theory, right? Very important theory. So when we go home, we put that self on, and we become ourself according to Goffman. This is another cool book, um, to read, that I encourage you guys to check out, and a really fun, fun theory to analyze and apply. It'd be interesting to see what Goffman would say about all the social media and things like that. His daughter, Alice, is a young rock star, kind of, sociologist. I think she's at Penn now. She was at University of Wisconsin, um, Madison. She wrote a book called, On the Run, um, and you'll see her TED talk in the stuff on. I believe that's in socialization and. Let me see where Alice. You guys would like her. She's sharp. She looked a lot at, informal economies, in the formal drug economy, and looked at this problem that we have with the socialization process, where some kids are socialized to go to college, and others, it goes to jails and prisons and things like this because of trends in the social structure. Um, a lot of good stuff on to double down and look at this week, with this. If you notice, I kind of was talking about some of this stuff with inequality and social marginalization. I'm priming you guys for when we get into the stuff on social stratification, right? Which is this layering of society relative to wealth and power and prestige, right? Um, have and have not type of analysis of society. Um, so, if I kind of lost you a little bit, I'm kind of just giving you an earful this morning. Any questions on today's lecture? Anything? You got a good understanding? this unit on social structure and social interaction. Got a thumb up from Jason. And there's a good video here for next week on how does politics make us irrational. So yeah, a lot of, when we relate this to social construction of reality and presentation of self, sociologists would make note of and concern of how irrational social actors can be at times in societies is reacting to large scale social change. Even
I don't remember where I read it.
even
I
today.
think it was so far in this class. I read it in one of these extras, or maybe in the OER book, but it said something to, I'm not verbatim here, but something like society will change dramatically every 10 years. In my 43 years on this planet, from what I can remember, I feel like that's a pretty true and valid statement.
Yeah. Now it's like, it's 1 year. It's massive. So there was a lot of sociologists, 10, 15 years ago. Richard Florida was one. He talked about the Great Reset, ongoing inequality, group polarization, very advanced social marginalization, very intensified negative political participation, that this was setting us up for a great reset. So a lot of scholars are like kind of sitting back now and kind of watching if this is it, right?
Right. I don't
Lot of
pretend to.
lot of stuff to fix, as you guys know.
It feels like we're in like the perfect storm right now.
Sure does, doesn't it?
Hmm.